Matthew chapter 9, you can turn there if you want. This to me would describe, if I had to look at what God's doing and I'm stunned by it, I'm amazed. But if I could put it to language in a moment in Jesus' life, this would be it. Matthew chapter 9, verse 35, we have this picture of a day in the life of Jesus, all the way through 38. And this is both an exact moment where he says some very, specific sentences, but in many ways, we're also getting a picture of what Jesus saw and felt many days of his life. It says, when Jesus went through all the towns and the villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. And in chapter 10, he sends out his disciples in an answer to that very prayer. Now, in this moment, here's what I want you to feel a little bit. We'll spend a few minutes here, is that you got to kind of get into what Jesus saw and felt in this story to realize how profound what he says really is. It says in the beginning here that Jesus went through all the towns and villages. Something we don't often know or maybe think about is that the town and the village of Jesus' day was living in 70% poverty. So 7 out of every 10 homes that Jesus is walking by, 7 out of every 10 families that he's encountering lack the sufficient resources to thrive. They're malnourished, they're undereducated, and they are living in the anxiety, the fear of the future that comes along with poverty. 7 out of 10. That is abject poverty, and that's what Jesus sees as he walks through the town and the village of his day. Then it says he's teaching in the synagogue. And how many of you know that when Jesus walked into the back of the synagogue, it was not like a Randy Clark meeting? How many of you know when Jesus walked in the back of the synagogue, he was like, my goodness, we have lost our way. The synagogue of Jesus' day is dead religion. The synagogue of Jesus' day is hypocrisy. They have made up hundreds and hundreds of laws called the Talmud on top of the Torah. They're living under the heavy yoke of oppressive leadership. It's mostly dead religion with probably a few sincere people on the outside, but that's the church of Jesus' day. Then this amazing statement that Jesus was healing the sick, but often we don't think about what Jesus endured to heal the sick. Because to heal the sick, you've got to be among the sick. And in Jesus' day, they weren't in nice lines in the front of nice air-conditioned buildings. Neither were they in nice intensive care units with good health care and nice nurses. In Jesus' day, like many nations across the earth still today, the sick, the chronically ill, the handicapped were lining busy streets in big cities begging for a livelihood. And he would have seen it, he would have smelled it, he would have heard it, the pains and the agonies of illness and incurable sicknesses. And it's amazing that he was healing them, but you've got to feel a little bit of the overwhelming sight he would have seen as he walked those streets. Then it says from there that he kind of lifts his eyes up and he looks at the common person walking to the market, on their way down the street, going to work. And it says that they're harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Now, if you dig into the New Testament at all, you realize that racial division is off the charts in Jesus' day. The animosity between the Jews and the Gentiles, the Jews and the Samaritans, the Romans and everybody else, there's huge racial division. That harassed and helpless is depression, discouragement, anxiety, the effects of poverty. Also in Jesus' day, it would be hard to find someone who wasn't oppressed by someone else. Rome is oppressing all that they rule over. The Jewish leaders are oppressing the common person. Men are oppressing women. Adults are oppressing children. This is the scene that Jesus sees. It's sort of depressing. But unless you can relate to that, unless you can feel it, unless you can see it, unless you can hear it, unless you can touch it, then you don't realize how profound it is when he looks into a crisis that would easily rival the crisis of our hour, and he declares, the harvest is ripe. Because it's way too easy to read headlines, watch the news, go on the internet and ask yourself the question, what in the heck are we gonna do next? And our default is to find someone to blame. The government, this, that, this group, that group, this generation, that generation, this demographic. Jesus looks into the face of crisis and he declares the harvest is ripe. He's looking for a few people today. They could look at their cities, that can look at America, that can look at our high schools and see past the crisis to a ripe harvest field. To think of the lenses that he saw. And I want to ask you this question. If Jesus could say that over a nation that was about to crucify him, what do you think he's saying over America today? If Jesus could say that over the Israel of his day, do you think he looks at any nation, any place on the earth, and he's like, man, too hard, too dark? Or do hard and dark not really exist in God's vocabulary? Human constructs to make excuses for what we think is impossible. Instead of being able to look at any nation, any situation, any city, any family, any inner city and go, it may look dark, but it's actually a manifestation of a longing for a Savior. And the darker the hour, the riper the harvest field. It takes an entirely different kind of person, friends, to look at America today and not grow cynical, not get jaded, not get critical, not find someone to blame, but to look at America today and declare with hope and with urgency and with faith, the harvest is ripe in America. The harvest is ripe in our cities. The harvest is ripe in Gen Z. The harvest is ripe in every generation, every city, every state, every community. This is not an hour to retreat. This is an hour to move with faith and urgency into a ripe harvest field. And you realize in this moment, the issue has never been ripeness. It's always been a laborer issue. Jesus doesn't say pray for ripeness. He says pray for laborers who believe it's ripe. Pray for laborers who have eyes to see past the crisis. He has a different lens and he is longing that the church would put on that lens today. Now, maybe as profound as his ability to see in the midst of the chaos, the division, all that's going on, this ripe harvest field, this might even be more astounding because Jesus is in the ultimate rock and a hard place. He's looking in front of him at chaos, confusion, division, poverty, sickness, oppression. And he goes, ripe harvest field. Then maybe even more amazing, he looks back at his 12 disciples as hopeless as the situation in front of him. And he goes, and you're the solution. Unbelievable. And you think about this moment is as historic as almost any moment in the Gospels. Through so much of the Old Testament, especially after the formation of the nation of Israel, when God moves on the earth, he often moves through a king, a priest, or a prophet. He raises up someone like Elijah, Elisha, Isaiah, or King David, or Solomon, or Jehoash. He moves through a priest like Aaron or Zadok. And this is often when God is needing to do something on the earth, he raises up someone in these roles. But in this moment, Jesus forever changes human history. He looks out at the brokenness, the crisis, and he goes, the harvest is ripe. And actually, I'm changing the strategy. I'm doing something far more dangerous. I don't need someone with a position or a title. He goes, from this point on, I'm using everyday normal people. And I will anoint them, common people, with an uncommon spirit to be the solution of the crisis of their day. I mean, think about these guys. They're arguing about who's the greatest in the kingdom. They have stooped to the lowliness of getting their moms involved. And he looks out at this and he goes, ripe harvest field. And he goes, and you're the solution. Both of these are impossible situations unless you have eyes to see. And in our day, we are all too quickly, dangerously, when we face crisis, we look for someone with a position or a title and we rule ourselves out. Today, we want to prop up people with a certain gifting, a certain calling, a certain passion, a certain title. And all the while, Jesus is going, look in the mirror. I have not changed the strategy. You are the priest, you are the prophet, you are the king. I am raising up the everyday believer to be the solution in this crisis. And the last point, and I'll end here, maybe most profound to me and maybe most important of this story, and if you hear me say one thing tonight, maybe it would be this. It is so easy when we're faced with the crisis, when we see difficulty around us, when we feel the rise of humanism all around us, pushing against our incredible Judeo-Christian truths, is it's easy to get frustrated. It's easy to get a little cynical. It's easy to get hard-hearted and a little bit jaded. And we've probably all been there. We've heard it so many times. What in the world is this generation gonna do next? What in the world is this government gonna do next? What in the world is this city gonna do next? And we think it, we say it, and we get a little bit cynical, a little bit jaded, a little bit frustrated. It's so astounding that Jesus looks at this situation and it says he is moved with compassion. We get so frustrated at sinners for sinning. But how can they act like a man they've never met? How can they walk in a freedom they've never experienced? And Jesus, with great love and great compassion, not wanting to raise up just robotic harvesters, not people that would just move on obligation, just move in blind obedience, or just do it because that's what we should do. Jesus models this incredible love, this compassion, and I wrestled for several years going, God, what is this love that's so unique? What do you call this type of compassion? And because of a little bit of our own story, I felt the Lord began to speak to me about this simple phrase, adoptive love. And this was the key to this phrase, and this is where I will land us tonight, is that I'm a parent. And as a parent, you have one goal, really. I would say you have lots of goals, but one of them is, can you get your kids to take responsibility for their own actions? Come on, parents. And you're like, if you get there, you're the greatest parent in history. You're like, I might have made some mistakes today, but my kid washed his own bowl. Best dad ever. It's just like, it's a sign and a wonder. And you have this goal, like, if I just raise my kids to take responsibility for their own actions, then I have absolutely won as a dad, and that is a responsible citizen. I want to propose to you today that taking responsibility for our own actions is the low bar of maturity, and that the high bar of maturity is taking responsibility for someone else's actions. Because this compassion that Jesus moved in is profound. He looked at a sickness he had no part in. He looked in a sin that he had nothing to do with. He looked down at a broken world that he was not the cause of. He looked down at oppression that was the opposite of everything in him. He looked down at our situation, our brokenness, and our world, and he goes, I didn't cause an ounce of it, but I will fully take responsibility for it. We sit in these chairs today because Jesus took responsibility for a sin he didn't cause. Adoptive love is a love that takes responsibility for a brokenness it had no part in. Adoptive love, see, it's easy to read another headline and be like, my gosh, another school shooting, and our immediate response, the government should do something, the school should do something, parents should do something. And when is the last time we looked at it and went, that's my responsibility? Because 9 out of every 10 kids that's ever done a school shooting in America had no dad. We so easily pass blame. We so easily push it to someone else. We so easily look for someone to point a finger to. Jesus didn't look for someone to blame. Jesus took the blame. Adoptive love goes, I didn't cause it, but I will fix it. In my own family, like I said, we got a lot of kids. We're missionaries. I thought, my gosh, we're gonna have 2 kids. It's gonna be awesome, babe. Man-to-man defense. There's a reason they play that in the NBA. It works. You get one, I get one. We'll manhandle this thing. We can travel easily, go to any nation. Plus, we can always have a cool car. Babe, that's important. I'm from Alaska. We got to fit in a truck. It'll be the death of my ego. I'm not willing to die if we graduate from that truck. But after our second kid was amazing, and I was like, man, isn't it great, babe, to know that we're done? We got a son, we got a daughter, and then I saw this look that I was not ready for. I'm like, you're not done, are you? And she got her way because she's far more godly than me. And we had our 3rd child, and I was like, wow, 3 kids. This is amazing. Like, we still kind of fit in a car. Like, we still squish. And, this is cool. Like, we got 3. We shifted in a little bit of zone defense. Well, we can still get this, And then I was like, babe, amazing. Look at these kids. They're beautiful. We have a son and 2 daughters. And I was like, it's just so great to know our family's complete. And then I saw the look again. And I was like, you're kidding me? So we have a 4th child. Now, we made a mistake with this 4th child. Come on, we all make mistakes. Don't judge me. And our mistake was we named this child his first name, and it was right. That was God. We named him Valor. The mistake we made was not kind of counteracting that with a middle name like Serenity or Shalom or Calm or Peace. And this kid came out like half dinosaur, half human. Like, I know we raised him, but I feel he was raised by wolves somehow. And like the energy this kid had could power whole cities. And I was like, babe, we have now 4, but really we have like 11. And I was like, we are done. Like, I'm putting my foot down. I am the man of this household. But that look again, And I was like, well, I don't know about this. We'll just see, right? And we go on with life, and my wife's she's so full of love and compassion, and she starts to hear about some of the brokenness of the foster care in our community. And so I'm like, well, it's kind of temporary. Like, we should at least find out. We got way too many people living in our house. Like, they won't even let us do it, So, well, let's find out. And a lady comes over. She shares with us. She goes, oh, yeah, you'd never qualify because you got too many people living in your house. And, but she goes, there is this thing called private foster care. And actually, I have this 2-year-old little girl. Her mom is going to be homeless. And she called me. She needs a place for her child. And I'm not saying you should take this child. And I'm like, oh, good. Let's set that straight right now. But I'm just giving you an example of what's out there. And I was like, man, thank God, I got to take my son to soccer. I'm going to see you guys later. I take Asher to soccer, and I'm there, and I'm just waiting for my phone to ring. I don't know if I should turn it off. Should I block my wife? What should I do in this moment? No joke. The phone rings, and no, she didn't even say hi. She's not even like, how you doing? She's not anything. She's like, we're taking the child, aren't we? And I was like, what took you so long to call? I mean, I was there an hour ago. I'm just glad you finally came to that, babe, because I knew it immediately. I was ready to take that child. It's not really how it happened. So long story short, this little 2-year-old gets dropped off in our home, and it's amazing. She's beautiful, but my dinosaur's 2 years old. So now we've got twin 2-year-olds. They're a month apart, and I never wanted twins. In fact, I prayed vehemently against them. But my wife's a twin, and she prayed passionately for them. I'm like, dang it, she got her way again. Like, they're the same age, this woman. And so we have these 2 little 2-year-olds. And guys, I tell you, I always knew women were the superior species. I always knew it. But it was never more evident to me. My son, he didn't talk. He wasn't interested in it. He had 3 grunts: hungry grunt, tired grunt, and happy grunt. That was it. This little 2-year-old comes in, same age, and she has a vocabulary. And I'm like, this is astounding. It's playing out right in front of me here. And she's coaching him up, teaching him how to talk. And I'm like, oh, this isn't so bad. She can kind of disciple him, And it's probably a month in, we realize maybe mom's not fully ready to be mom. She's got some stuff going on. Doesn't really seem like she's ready to even bring her daughter back into her life. And day after she drops this little girl off, she starts calling my wife mommy. And I'm like, time out. I know you just only been here a day. We don't say that in this house unless you're one of these ones, And she just won't stop. She's calling my wife mommy. And about a month in, I realized that as amazing as her vocabulary is, she has no word for dad because she's never had one. And she starts calling me dad because I become the first father figure in her life. And I'm like, oh man, this is starting to mess me up a little bit. About 3-4 months go by, and mom, she's amazing. Absolutely, we honor her, and we just absolutely honor and bless her. Did not feel ready to be mom, and through some circumstances reached out and said, I'm not ready to do this. My daughter will be far better off with you guys. And I thought, oh my gosh, this was not the plan. And I remember in this moment I had a choice, because I looked at this beautiful little 2-year-old, and my thought, I knew her story a little bit more, and I go, I am not the reason that this little girl does not have a dad. I am not the reason that this little 2-year-old has been through some trauma already. I am not the reason that this is actually generations of brokenness. I didn't cause this. But it was in this moment that I realized I could take responsibility for a mess I hadn't caused. And though I wasn't the reason she didn't have a dad, I could become the reason that she'd have a dad the rest of her life. And we had the immense privilege of moving in adoptive love with this little girl. And now that little girl is 9 years old, and she is my daughter, and she is a delight to our family. And the end of the story, and I'm gonna end this here, is it was probably 2 years later, we got a phone call, this time about a 15-year-old who was had threatened her own life, and she'd been removed from her home. Her mom was struggling with some stuff. Her dad had died a few years previous, and her brother had just committed suicide. And this 15-year-old needed a place to come. It was emergency, and we weren't even certified. We didn't have the space, but we went to our kids, and now they're starting to get struck with this incredible love that I can't even imagine having had at their age. And we gather the kids, and I've got 5 at this point, and we go, hey, we need to pray. This is a situation. We're not sure we're even the right family for this, but it's kind of a significant situation. And I go, we really need to pray, and I share about it. My 2 daughters, my 2 older daughters, they go, we're not praying. I'm like, what do you mean? They go, we're making cookies. She's coming. And I'm like, I go, no, we're praying. Like, it might have been a dad wound moment. I don't know, guys. They probably need a lot of inner healing. But I go, no, we're praying. They go, no, we're not praying. And they literally go, this girl needs a home and we're a home. She goes, we're baking cookies. Can you ask what kind of cookies she likes? Because we're baking cookies. And I asked my son, and he was the oldest, and this would affect him the most. And I go, Asher, we just got to pray. We got to know what God's heart is in this. And he's all right. And he was at the time, I guess he'd have been 13. And I go, would you just go pray? And he actually went in my office, and he was there for a little while. I'm like, poor kid probably fell asleep. I'm like, I get it. I fall asleep praying too, So I go in there to peek, and my 13-year-old is on his knees praying. And he comes out, and he goes, Dad, he goes, she needs a family. And we're a family. How could we say no? My 13-year-old. And this 15-year-old, she comes and lands in our home. She's been through so much. And all of a sudden, this adoptive love driving deeper into our hearts to take responsibility for a brokenness we had nothing to do with. And the thing that so astounded me was as this 15-year-old landed and with our family and started to eat those cookies, it was our 6-year-old adopted daughter, where the assignment on her life was rejection. From the time she was born, assignment on her life was that she would never know her identity. Assignment on her life is that she would repeat the cycle of rejection and brokenness. But because of adoption, because of being brought into a family, because of giving a new inheritance, she is coming into her identity, and she had broken the lies of rejection over her life. And the thing that astounded me was I watched this little 6-year-old become the key to melt a 15-year-old's heart. And I watched the adopted become the adoptive. And a 6-year-old begin to move in adoptive love for a brokenness she had had nothing to do with, though she could relate. And I watched that 15-year-old begin to melt under the power of adoptive love. And we had the privilege of baptizing her before she was reunited with her mom, which is an amazing story in and of itself. And my question to us tonight is, in the midst of this crisis around us, midst of this ripe harvest field, is there space in our hearts to move into a measure of adoptive love, to take responsibility for a brokenness we may not have caused, instead of hoping that someone else will rise up, finding someone else to blame? I look at the high schools of America. Who is going to move in adoptive love? I look at a foster care system today and go, who is going to move in adoptive love? If one family out of every church in America took one of these children in that literally has no hope for reunification, there would not be a single orphan in America. But I'm so glad that a couple hundred years ago, a man named Hudson Taylor looked at a vast continent called China and said, it's dark, it has no gospel presence, and I'm not the cause of its darkness, but I will become the cause of its adoption. And aren't you glad that because of Hudson Taylor's obedience, there's over 100 million Christians in China today? Because someone took responsibility for a mess they hadn't caused. Friends, at the core of every missions movement, at the core of every revival, at the core of every reformation is not just good ideas and good strategy. It's the heart of Jesus moving in a generation with radical, servant-hearted, adoptive love and compassion. I want you to stand tonight.